Harmon is the president of Skurnik Wines and Spirits, a leading importer and distributor of family-owned wines and spirits that was founded by Harmon's brother Michael in 1987. So our key three takeaways for today and what we're really excited to learn from Harmon are, first of all, the tariffs in real time. What's happening today? What's at stake? Second, the collateral damage, how these tariffs hurt U.S. wine businesses and consumers. And third, how to build your business, your wine business in a volatile market. Some lessons maybe we can take from Skurnik Wines. All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market with me, Barbara Fitzgerald. In this show, we'll break down the complexities of selling wine in the U.S. by discussing the relevant issues of today with experts from around the globe. Each episode serves up 3 key insights to help elevate your winery's presence in the U.S. market. So grab a pen and paper and let's pave the way for your success in the U.S. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Harmon Skurnik to the show. Harmon is the president of Skurnik Wines and Spirits, a leading importer and distributor of family-owned wines and spirits that was founded by Harmon's brother Michael in 1987. Since joining the company in 1989, after a decade with marketing agencies like BBD&O, Harmon has helped grow Skurnik from a small startup into a nationally recognized portfolio representing over 500 estates with direct operations in 9 U.S. states. He's also a passionate industry advocate, serving on the board of the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance, where he's been a vocal opponent of harmful tariffs on imported wines and spirits. So welcome to the show, Harmon. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
As I mentioned when we chat before, I'm such a fan of the Skurnik portfolio, so I wish that we got to meet under more romantic circumstances.
Well, we could always use an extra fan. We love fans. Why we've been successful. We have a lot of fans. But I would like to say at the outset, we are a fan of Italian wine and have been since a very long time, but in the business since the mid-1990s, where we have imported many, many Italian wines from all over the boot. And we have been championing Italian wines in the United States for several decades now. And it is a particular area of passion for myself. And I drink Italian wines all the time. And so thank you for having a podcast that focuses on the great wines of Italy. I think it's the country with the most indigenous grape varieties of any country in the world. And I think that a lot of people feel or think of Italy and they think of Barolo and Brunello and some of the great DOCs, but there are literally hundreds of small DOCs with just gorgeous, beautiful wines that express terroir throughout the country. And we are happy to be a leader in importing these great wines, and we hope that we can continue to import them despite the current headwinds in Washington, D.C.
Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. It's music to our Vinitaly International ears. But before we dive into today's discussion, Harmon, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to work in the wine business?
Sure. Well, growing up in a suburban household in Long Island and on the South Shore of Long Island, bedroom community, typical American upbringing, middle-class upbringing. I would say our household was a little unusual because my parents in 1970, when I was just a wee lad, took a trip to Europe, and they went to France. And famously, they left Scotch drinkers and they came home wine drinkers. So they came back very passionate about the subject. My father built a wine cellar in the basement, and my mother stocked it with 61 Bordeaux's and German wines and Italian wines. And they started drinking wine with dinner regularly. And so as a child, I got exposed to it at a very early age. Fast forward to after graduating university and working, my brother, Michael, who's my partner in this business, was working at the top of the World Trade Center at Windows on the World as a waiter, and got an opportunity to work in the wine cellar there for Kevin Zraly, who's a very well-known today expert wine educator. But he was the head sommelier at Windows on the World, which was the number one wine destination for any restaurant in the United States from the 1970s to the time of its demise, unfortunately. I started working up there as well when I came back while I was a student, and I came back in the summers. Michael got me a job up there. So we both got exposed to wine from a restaurant's point of view early. And while I pursued my marketing career, I was in advertising, worked in advertising agencies over the next several years. Michael pursued a career in wine, worked for Kevin as a cellar rat there, as we call it, and then went out selling for a wine distributor that's now defunct called Establishment Import Company as a salesman. And later on, he got a job working for a Burgundy negociant called Momasan as a national sales rep, went around the country selling to distributors. And kind of on the side, he met a few winemakers in California, some producers that nobody had ever heard of before. One is called Bonnie Doon, and the other is
Oh,
called William Sellium. Nobody had ever heard of them.
yeah.
And he started bringing in a few cases on the side as a favor to some friends of his who used to work at Windows and now were buyers at various restaurants around the city. And so he brought in 5 cases here, 5 cases there. And that was the beginnings of developing a business for himself. And a couple of years later, after he was dabbling in that sort of business, he landed a French portfolio that was imported by Kermit Lynch. And, with names like Cocheterie and Ravenel and Vieux Telegraph. And the legend goes, he gave me a call and said, quit your job and come work for me. And that's what I did in 1989.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, it kind of is. And it flew by in a
Yeah.
nanosecond. I mean, here we are 38 years later, and we're employing 275 people all over the country. We've got wholesale operations in 9 states, and we're a national importer. Many wines from Italy, as well as Germany, Austria, France, and Spain as well. And, it's been a great ride. And it's been a great ride tariff free for 34 out of those 38 years. We had a little bit of a tariff headache in 2019 in the first Trump administration, and now it's coming back in spades.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into our discussion today, which is going to be, again, based on these current tariffs. I like to note the date that we're recording. It's April 16th, just because it seems like this conversation is constantly in flux. So this is April 16th, and we try to turn these tariff episodes around as quickly as possible. But yeah, Harmon really has this great, rare dual perspective. You're deeply rooted in fine wine and experienced in navigating global supply chain volatility. And as we mentioned, as president of Skurnik Wines and Spirits, you played a pivotal role in growing the company's portfolio from around the world. So you've really become one of the most respected voices in fine wine and spirits distribution.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Good. With this decades of experiencing navigating complex global supply chains, you can bring some really critical insight into how these escalating tariffs stand to disrupt not just imports, but the broader US wine market. So, our key 3 takeaways for today and what we're really excited to learn from Harmon are, first of all, the tariffs in real time. As I mentioned, it's April 16th. What's happening today? What's at stake? Second, the collateral damage, how these tariffs hurt US wine businesses and consumers. And third, how to build your business, your wine business in a volatile market. Some lessons maybe we can take from Skurnik Wines. All right, so let's dive right in. So we are, kind of in the midst, not kind of, we are in the midst of a trade war. So how would you describe the current state of play? And what do you think are the most realistic steps in escalation?
I would say the current state of play is volatile. I mean, everything about this administration seems to be all about volatility, instability, uncertainty. These are all adjectives that we don't like to ascribe to the business world. It's not possible to really plan and conduct your business in an era of instability when you don't know what your costs are going to be. Right now, I'm sure most of your listeners know and are in the industry, so they've been following what's going on. We had threats at one point of up to 200% tariffs that Trump put out in a tweet overnight one night, and it rattled the wine industry, because it's one thing to have a 10% tariff, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, because I believe in free trade and there shouldn't be any tariffs. But it's one thing to have 10% and you can kind of manage that. And it's another thing to have 200% or anything in between, which could put you out of business. We had an experience with tariffs back in 2019, as I mentioned, and it came all of a sudden. It was an Airbus dispute with Boeing, and they decided to tariff wine as a result of that. And it not only was it 25% at the time, but it also went into effect overnight. So we had containers that were on the water that we had ordered weeks before. And the ones that arrived the next day, we had to pay that tariff right up front in order to get those goods. And you're talking about unplanned expenses of hundreds of thousands of dollars for a business. You can't really operate effectively that way when you don't know what your costs are. So, and we were kind of caught flat-footed at that time. We didn't know that tariffs could be a thing. We never even heard the word tariff in my first 35 years in the business. So this time we tried not to be flat-footed. We had created this organization called the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance, which has over 100 members of the wine trade, mostly in distribution, but also restaurateurs and other business owners. We're all aligned on this issue. We're all aligned to be anti-tariff. And so we got together 6 months before the last election, and we realized that this was a big campaign pledge of Trump's. Tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language and stuff like that. Ridiculous stuff like that. And we realized that we had to organize and get together and try to fight this from a very early stage. So we've been doing this for almost a year now, advocating, hiring a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., going down and talking to legislators, inviting them to wine tastings, letting them understand why imported wines are so good for this country and how it impacts American businesses. It's not something that hurts only the targeted country, but it hurts American businesses, American workers, and creates layoffs and unemployment and possibly puts companies out of business. So that's where we are. It's very volatile, and we don't know what the end game is. We don't know where we'll end up. We could end up 10% for the next 4 years, or it could be 20, which was what was threatened very recently for the EU, which Italy's a part of, but there were higher rates for other countries. I mean, South Africa was 30%. And so it's very, very volatile. But, the thing is, back in 2019, that airline dispute was only focused on wine. Now we're dealing with tariffs that are focused on all industries. And so we don't know where it's going to end up. We do know that they're focused very, very strongly right now on China. Mm-hmm. That's a terrible thing if you're an importer of Chinese goods. I mean, it's already at 145%. I don't know how you can survive with that kind of a tax on the goods that come into this country. But it seems like this Cold War between the U.S. and China is what's escalating. And the only silver lining of that might be that the EU takes a little bit of a back seat to that, and maybe they don't hit us that hard. And one thing that the EU did that was very, very positive in this negotiation or in this buildup, they had originally threatened a 50% tariff in retaliation on American whiskey when the U.S. put tariffs on their aluminum and steel. And that's when Trump tweeted the 200% threat. But the wine industry, when that happened, really got together and communicated that you might want to back off on that 50% threat on the whiskey, and they have. And the fact that they have backed off on that has kind of cooled the jets a little bit. And hopefully sane minds will prevail and we will end up with no more than 10%, but hopefully zero.
Yeah. So kind of to your point, right now the tariffs are in this 90-day pause, the EU tariffs, and it's not really a reprieve, right? It's kind of a pressure cooker window because, I mean, it would be great if it drops to 10% or zero, but it seems like, from my perspective, that this really is like administration's kind of policy, how they want to present to the world of, kind of being this force in this way. So it could also be more than 20%, which means that you as importers are stuck. How can you make investments not knowing, what happens when this order arrives at your door?
So true. I mean, we do have 90 days where we have he could change any day. Right. We just don't know because it's so unpredictable. But we do feel pretty confident that over the next 90 days, we have a business climate that we understand. We know that if we buy anything now and it comes in the next 3 months, we'll pay 10%. And we are going forward with that knowledge. But it's only 90 days. We don't know what's going to happen after that. It's interesting because they use the term pause, A lot of people think, oh, well, they just paused it for 90 days. Well, they didn't actually pause it because we have a 10% tariff now that we didn't have before.
Right.
So we have this additional cost. But, we won't know until July where we stand. And that's really what we need. We need some certainty. We need to know that the business climate, we need to know what we're dealing with so that we can plan. Right now, we're paralyzed as far as planning is concerned.
Right. And when talking about, kind of who else pays the price of a tariff, maybe you can help us trace through the supply chain, what happens the moment, we'll just say 20%. What happens from the moment a 20% tariff hits your invoice?
Well, for one thing, we have to pay it up front. So, the goods arrive at the port. We have to pay our custom fees. We normally pay excise taxes. It's a small percentage of the total value of the container. But if it's 20% and you have a container worth $100,000, just as use an example, I got to write a check for $20,000 just to release the container. So it's a sales tax is what it is. And it's a tax on American business and American consumers. Don't let any politician fool you when they say we're tariffing these foreign countries and the foreign countries are paying it. No, we pay it as American businesses. And in the wine industry, we pay more, we are harmed more than other industries. I'll try to give you an example. As you probably well know, we have a 3-tier system in the American wine distribution business that was set up after Prohibition. And it's very regulated business. And the law says that imported wines that come in have to be imported by an American company. That's a law. And then they have to, in turn, be sold to an American-owned distributor. That's also a law. That's not the case with other European goods. Louis Vuitton sells handbags. They bring them in. A French company imports them in. A French-owned store on Fifth Avenue sells them. There's no Dom Perignon store on Fifth Avenue. It has to be sold by an American company. So the result of all that is for every dollar that we spend on imported wines, it generates over $4.50 of American revenue to American companies. So the impact of tariffs are much greater on the American importers and the American distributors, retailers, restaurants, than it is on the targeted country. And that's why tariffs on wine are a bad idea. Where were we then? Where were we?
Well, you're talking about how, basically for every $1 of tariff, it's costing American businesses, consumers about $4.50.
Right. So these tariffs do tremendous damage to American businesses. We have 350,000 restaurants in the United States. We have 50,000 wine retailers. We have 6,000 wine importers and distributors. All of these companies employ a number of American workers. As I said before, if we were to get a 100% tariff or a 200% tariff, it could put us out of business and cause an incredible amount of unemployment. So these tariffs are destructive and they do tremendous damage to American businesses. And then, of course, there's just the whole way of life argument. I mean, an Italian restaurant who has a beautiful Italian menu, and they have to have Italian wines on the list for the authentic experience. It's incredibly important. I mean, you think that an Italian restaurant can just be forced into buying American wines? These are not fungible commodities like steel and aluminum. You can tariff steel and aluminum and create a market that's better for American steel manufacturers because the steel is the same produced in America as produced
Right.
in China. But Brunello de Montalcino, that can't be produced in America. Barolo, Gavi. So, these wines are unique. They reflect where they come from and they're authentic. And this is the world we grew up in. This is the world having the availability of these great wines at retail or in our great restaurants. I mean, this is the American way of life that they're threatening.
I actually, a couple weeks ago on the same topic, talked to Jason Haas from Tubeless Creek, and he was saying, we've kind of come up, this golden era of not just having this really robust wine production area, but having the kind of greatest diversity of wines available to us of anywhere in the world. And that's been a real gift to Americans. And I'm not sure that consumers yet understand what this threatens for them. What the kind of accessibility they're used to.
Jason is totally right, and he's been a terrific advocate from the standpoint of American wine producers. I think that's something that people don't always understand either, that most American wine producers, domestic wine producers, are anti-tariff too. which doesn't stand to reason and may not be the case with other industries. But they understand the same regulations apply to them. I mean, American wine producers need to sell to a distributor by law in other states. So if that distributor sells both domestic and imported wines, has to lay off half their staff, and has to be threatened to go out of business, that's not good for the American wine producer either. So the vast majority of American wine producers are anti-tariff, and that's counterintuitive in the tariff argument.
Yeah. Even to, it seems, our own administration, because they think this is going to benefit our domestic production.
Not true.
Yes, all the producers are really pushing back hard against that. So, some of the things that some people have been doing to maybe try to mitigate risk, et cetera, is like, trying to stockpile a little bit more, pre buy. But can you explain why those strategies might backfire? Would they backfire?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because back in 2019, we had an experience with that. Not only did we have the 25% tariff, but we also had a threat at one point of 100% tariff against champagne. I don't know if everybody who listens to the podcast remembers that, but because it never went into effect. But it was a threat, just like this 200% threat. And the champagne producers and we who import a lot of champagne kind of panicked a little bit. And we brought in like a year's supply of champagne in anticipation so that we would be able to get through that period. And it never came to fruition. And we ended up, overloaded with inventory for quite some time, which really puts a damper on your cash flow. It makes it difficult to operate. So this time we have decided not to panic. Panicking is not a good way to run a business, and not to stock up, because cash flow is everything in this business. We can't have all of our cash tied up in inventory and operate effectively. And because of the volatility and because it's always changing and the unpredictability, we don't know what the business rules will be in 3 months or 6 months. And so it's not a good gamble to do that, even if you have the cash to do it.
Right. And the fact that, a lot of economists believe that we're headed for a recession. So, if you're stockpiling on wine at a certain price point and then we head into this recession, you might be stuck with that. You might have to drop the price, take a loss. So,
no, in fact, it was quite the opposite. Rather than stocking up, when we were worried about the 200% threat, about 6 weeks ago or so, the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance advised all of its members to stop buying wines from the EU, because we didn't know whether that tariff was going to come into effect, and we didn't know whether we would have a goods on the water exception. And so, the unpredictability of it is, like, well, let's just stop buying because we just don't know. And until which time we had this 90-day reprieve, that's when we started shipping again. It's no way to run a candy store, I'll tell you that.
yeah. Are there certain price segments or even specific wine categories that you think are going to feel the pain first?
Yeah, I think the value price point is the one that's most at risk. If you have a wine that sells for $150 a bottle on the luxury side, and it's now 155 or 160, that well-heeled consumer may not bat an eye. But we know our retail friends, they'll tell you they have certain price points on the shelf that really move. Let's just say take $9.99, the famous price point retailers like to charge rather than $10. They know that if it's $9.99, they're going to sell a certain amount, and if it goes up to $11.99, they're going to sell half of it. Just the nature of the economic model. And so I think the value wines will be affected the most. And then, of course, there's the discussion between the importer and the supplier on how might we mitigate these tariffs. And some producers are willing to contribute to mitigating that tariff by reducing their prices, and some are not. And so the ones that do mitigate in concert with the importer have a better chance of maintaining their market share by keeping the prices steady, while those who don't, the prices have to go up, because
Right.
these types of things do get passed on. We just can't absorb them.
Right. Well, let's talk for a moment. You have in your career seen probably a lot of disruptions. I know you've talked a bit about the previous Trump administration's tariffs on French wines, but what feels different about this moment?
It's just the unpredictability. We've had disruptions before, like you said. I mean, COVID was a big disruption. That had a ton of unpredictability at first. We didn't know whether, the economy would just go into a depression and we would, our sales would drop by 50%. Restaurants were closed, for God's sakes. We didn't know. So there was a lot of unpredictability there, but it wasn't man-made.
Yeah.
It was getting a handle on a situation. Following 9/11, we had a similar kind of recession, and of course in 2008, the Great Recession, financial crisis. But eventually, after a certain amount of time, the the playing conditions become evident, and you're able to plan. Crisis planning is all about possibility. I always say, plan for the worst and hope for the best. But the conditions become evident with time, and hopefully that will be the case here. But for the last 6 months and now for another 90 days, we still have a period of uncertainty, and we don't know what the business conditions are. So like we said before, it's hard to plan
Yeah.
in those conditions. We hope it will become evident shortly, and then we can deal with it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, what would you say, especially for some small producers or importers, do you have any advice for what they can actually do right now to stay resilient?
Again, don't panic. Don't make any panic moves. Work with your suppliers to try to mitigate risk. If your supplier will give you a 10% discount so that you don't have, when you pay that tariff, the prices can remain stable. That's good for them. It's good for you. And, you know, guard your cash flow. I mean, it's in periods of instability, you've got to be flexible. Unfortunately for the producer, who, many of whom are listening here, this kind of environment is kind of like a paralysis. You can't commit to large purchases like you normally might. It's a great vintage. Let's commit to X number of cases. If you don't know the business conditions you're operating under, it's really hard to do that. So, for the small and medium importers where cash flow is tough to begin with, you just got to be careful and don't make any rash moves.
Yeah, that's good advice. Because you've also been, so active in advocacy, it's very important, right, to show up as a unified voice. So, how can other businesses really plug into the work you're already doing here with the US Wine Trade Alliance?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, we can use as many members as we can get. Not to mention the donations too. I mean, this stuff is really expensive. To hire a top-notch lobbyist firm in Washington D.C. is very expensive, and we've gotten tremendous participation by many importers across the country, and we're really really thankful for that. We have a website. It's uswinetradealliance.com, I believe. We have a Facebook page called U.S. Wine Trade Alliance, which you can join. And it's good to be a member, not only to help in the cause, but there's a lot of information that we're constantly sharing with the membership because it's changing so radically so often.
Right.
And so you get on that mailing list so that you can be updated on the ever changing circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, these are kind of like the key words of the topic: volatility, unpredictability. And as you said, how can a business strategize in that landscape? It's really difficult.
Yeah, it's impossible, and so we hope it'll be short lived, and the rules will become apparent shortly. That's what we can do. We can hope for the best.
Yes. Well, you know what? I was going to ask you before we wrap up, I was going to ask you this one final question. What is giving you hope right now? Anything?
Ah, it's hard.
You're right.
Great wine gives me hope. Yeah, I'll tell you what. The unity of the wine industry against this gives me some hope. You can get a bunch of wine importers in the room and retailers and restaurant buyers, and you can talk about anything, and you will not get agreement on almost any topic. Everybody has a different opinion on what's good and what works and what's right. But when it comes to tariffs, there's more unity than on any other topic. And so we're so fully aligned on it that it gives me some hope that, and we've had some successes. This last announcement on the tariffs did come with a goods on the water exception, which means that all the goods that were on their way to the United States were not subject to the tariffs. And that was a good thing. And it came because of our advocacy.
Yeah.
And, we just hope that at some point, we've had a lot of good discussions with senators and congresspeople. They understand what's at stake. But again, it's not just the wine industry that's threatened right now. So it's kind of hard to stand out. But we hope someday they will realize when they do come out with a list of what products ought to be tariffed, they ought to leave wine off of it.
Yeah, because as you said, we can't have Chianti Classico in California and Burgundy and
Doesn't exist.
Washington, or yeah. Those wines are special for California and Washington, special for other reasons, but not because they're Chianti or Burgundy.
No, we believe in terroir. We're in the wine industry and we believe in terroir. These products
Yeah.
are unique. And, California makes great Chardonnay and Cabernet, but, it's not Burgundy and Bordeaux. And New York State makes an amazing Riesling, but it's not Mosel or Rheingau. And those products are unique. And in the United States, we like to have access to all of these products from all over the world. It would be a sad day if we were forced to only drink American wine. As much as I love American wine, we started out as a company being a distributor of American wines. And we today, almost half of what we sell is American produced. We're big fans, but it doesn't mean that we should force our economy to only buy American wines, as patriotic as that sounds. It's also patriotic to have access to goods from all over the world. This is America. This is a land of free trade.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman, there's a video going around where he's an economist from the 1970s and 80s who I used to follow. He's a free trade economist. And when he was talking about tariffs, he said, yeah, there are countries around the world that tariff us, but should we respond by tariffing them? He said, it's like being in a boat and your friend who's in the boat takes a gun and shoots a hole in the bottom of the boat and it starts to sink. And your response to that is to shoot another hole in the boat.
Yeah.
Is that the proper response? No, because we believe in free trade. You tariff us, we tariff you. The ultimate goal of all of this, we hope, would be 0-0 tariffs. Europe can be protectionist, and they do have tariffs on some American goods, not wine. I don't think the tariffs on American wine are very high at all. But if the negotiators get together and they actually say, let's make it 0-0, we won't tariff you, you don't tariff us, we'll be very, very happy with that outcome. I hope that's what they will do. Unfortunately, I think that this administration is kind of drunk on the sorry to use the
industry lingo.
On the potential. They're intrigued by the potential of the revenue that they're going to get from these tariffs. They want to make their tax cuts permanent on their constituents and their billionaire buddies. And the way that they can do that, the only way they can do that is by taking in this revenue on these tariffs. I mean, that's, I think, the way they're thinking. And if that's the way they're thinking, then they're not going to be incentivized to go to the 0-0 result.
Right.
But I hope they do.
Yes, me too. I hope that it's kind of the history and the sociology even of the product is where we're supposed to share it with other countries, other cultures, other peoples, and connect with each other through that. So
that's the way it's always been. I hope we get back to that someday. Americans love to travel to Europe. We love to go to Italy. We love everything Italian. We love Italian food. We love Italian wines. I hope saner minds will prevail. Part of the results of this latest spat with Canada is that Canadians are not traveling to the United States on vacation anymore. The airplanes are empty. I mean, the publicity on this for the American way of life around the world is so negative.
Yeah.
And I really hope we can get back to America being viewed by the world as this beacon of freedom and this beacon of of hope, and not as this negative, bullying country that just wants to browbeat its friends and enemies with these tariffs as a cudgel. I hope we'll get away from that.
Here, here. Speaking of patriotism, our American wine brands are hurting because of this perception. I mean, we know in Canada they're taking off the shelves, but there's other countries too that are starting to turn away American tenders, and there's just no appetite for American products right now in the global context, and that hurts our small producers or any size producer here, but especially, the little guys that have invested so much.
It's man-made self-destruction. There's no winners in a trade war. There are no winners.
Yes. And I think that's an important point to drive home, because we want our global industry to understand that, there's no really part of the supply chain in the US that supports what's happening with tariffs on alcohol right now.
No, and I feel bad for the 350,000 restaurants in particular because, well, first of all, they went through hell during COVID, and now the business is pretty good for restaurants. They've come back quite a bit, bounced back from that experience, but they don't make any money on the food. Restaurants don't
Right.
make money on the food. Margins are razor thin. Where they make money is on wine, on their wine list, particularly imported wine, if you're an Italian restaurant. And if we make those wines unaffordable, then I fear for these restaurants will go through another period where they'll have to go out of business. And it's just, haven't they suffered enough?
Right. Well, on that note, we will start winding down here, and we like to wrap up Masterclass US Wine Market with a rapid fire quiz where we ask our guests 3 questions to help our listeners just better understand the US wine market and specifically this episode. So just answer in a couple sentences if you can. But number one, what is your number one tip for mastering the US wine market?
My number one tip for mastering the US wine market, well, I would say hire good people. Have a couple adages that we have repeated over and over again is, to be successful in this business, you have to have good product, you have to have great wines, and you have to have great people. And if you have both of those things, you have a chance to be successful.
I love that.
We try to, and I think we apply the same kind of skills to hiring people as we do to which wines we select for the portfolio. Those are the 2 key components.
Yeah. It's beautiful. At the end of the day, it's about people. I love that. Okay, number 2, what is something you would have told your younger professional self about selling wine in the US?
I would say, master your craft and know your product. Product knowledge and it is incredibly important. And also know your customers and be cognizant of their needs. I think there are some people in the wine business who are very full of themselves, but it's really all about the customer. And, Steve Jobs, there's a video that goes around back in the day. I think that's what made Apple successful, not only their innovation, their product innovation, but they were very, very customer oriented and customer focused. And if you focus on your customers' needs, that will help you be successful in any part of this business.
Yeah, that's great advice. Again, back to the people. So first, the people who's getting the product out there, and then second, the people you're getting it to.
Exactly. It's a people business, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and last, we move around a lot in the wine industry. So what is your favorite travel hack when doing market work?
Travel hack is not a phrase that comes from my generation, but I think what you mean is, something when you're traveling that
Yeah, some practical advice when on the road.
practical advice. The most practical advice I would give when you're traveling is don't check your bag. Take a small bag, take it on board, get off the plane, and you're done. You don't have to worry about your bag being lost. But I don't know. Is that a travel hack?
That is, and I'm also a disciple of the carry-on luggage. It's like, yeah, the only way to go. Well, Harmon, thank you so much for your time today, for joining us and giving us all these incredible insights. How can our listeners connect with you?
Well, they can just go to skurnik.com is our website, or on social media. We are pretty active on Instagram. I believe it's at Skurnik Wines as well, and on Facebook. We don't do much on X, these days. And you can reach out there on my own page on Instagram, and Facebook is also there. H Skurnik, I believe it is. Happy to see you there. And or you could send me an email. My email address is hs@skurnik.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for all of your time today. I hope we get to do that warm and fuzzy sharing of wine sometime soon.
Yes, when this is all over, let's do that.
Yeah. All right. Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, Barbara.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Masterclass US Wine Market. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest industry trends, remember to like, follow, and share our podcast. And if you find value in our conversations, please leave us a review to help others discover the show and grow our community. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday. Until then, brindiamo il vostro successo!